There are things you can do that will make fundraising much smoother and better. That's, a very important aspect of our due diligence. But it also is a good indication that they're onto something. We do have an anti-portfolio. Unfortunately, there's so many good companies out there that just don't make sense financially. Don't neglect the fundraising aspect to the last minute.
Hi, this is our new episode of Digital Health Interviews, and I'm really excited because finally, after almost 30 interviews, we have our first investor in digital health. And this is really important for startup founders to actually know the investor perspective, what they're looking for in terms of digital health startups, how to approach them, and many other things we're going to discuss today with our guest, Sebastian Anastassiou. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, Alex.
Let's start with a short intro.
Sure. So, my name. I'm originally mixed background, Cyprus and Norway. Professionally and by training, I have a background in neuroscience. Before joining Nina Capital, I spent most of my time in London, where I dabbled a bit in life science strategy consulting, but most of my time was spent at UCL, University College London, working out of their commercialization team. So we were responsible for commercializing the biomedical research that was produced by the academics of the university. So that was everything from it's the earliest stage of commercializing research in the biomedical and healthcare space. So everything from the intellectual property side. So I would assess technologies and research for their patentability and how we can protect it with intellectual property, right through to commercializing it, which either took the form of negotiating licensing deals with, say, pharma companies or medtech companies who would typically take the research that's been developed up to a certain stage, for example, a phase 1 therapeutic, and say a pharma company would license that technology, that IP, and develop it further to get it into the market. And then the university would receive royalties and other forms of payment as a revenue share and to get a share of the proceeds once the technology or the research is actually commercialized in the market. That's sort of one form. And then the other route was either setting up startup companies with the academics as founders, building in the right team, finding the initial investment, and spinning them off the university. So using startup companies as the commercialization vehicle and route to get the research into the market and ultimately into patients. After that, I came to Barcelona to do an MBA at IES Business School. And then part of that 2-year program is a summer internship, which I did here at Nina Capital. And then I converted to a full-time employee after that, where now I'm the principal and head of investments at the firm.
Congrats on that.
Thank you. And I had to stay in Barcelona. It's too nice of a place to live.
For sure. So how would you describe your current responsibilities at Nina Capital?
So we are a relatively small fund, and so we have our core team is 7, 6 of which are in the investment side, and so everyone does a bit of everything. but we're all we split into different focus areas. So some people have more of a focus on deal sourcing and deal flow. Others on investor relations with our own investors. I have a focus on the portfolio side. So a lot of portfolio management, working with our CEOs and founders on supporting them in the best way we can. And also leading the follow-on strategy. So with Nina Capital's strategy when it comes to investment is we reserve 60% of our fund for follow-on investments. So once we've invested, the majority of the rest of the money we save to invest again in our portfolio companies across the best ones. So how much we put in every single portfolio company varies. And that follow-on strategy is sort of also what I take a lead on. But again, a big part of my role is also looking at new opportunities, doing due diligence and analysis of new opportunities to make new investments.
All right, you've told us a lot about Nina Capital, but let's make a step back and tell us about the VC in general.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we're a small VC, health tech specialists and health tech focused. So we invest exclusively at the intersection of health and technology. What we do not do are the traditional life sciences, small molecules, drug discovery, these sorts of biotech companies that require that's very capital intensive, and they have a different profile of startup. We focus on this intersection of health and technology. Although we're highly specialized in that, we are relatively broad in that specific vertical. So we like solutions that can be based off AI, can be pure software plays, can be hardware, a mix of both. It can be regulated medical devices, unregulated healthcare tools. So we have a lot of AI in diagnostics, for example. Those are medical devices, but pure software. We also have an investment in the medical education space. So that's a platform for focused on continuous education for medical professionals. It's not directly patient facing, but if it impacts the healthcare ecosystem as a whole, that's okay. So we're quite broad in that sense.
How about wellness?
Wellness it stretches our thesis. So it has to have a core healthcare need. And a lot of wellness companies, we're not that comfortable in investing in that space, although we're always eager to learn and explore. So it's not like we've closed that door off, but right now we're focused more on core healthcare companies. In terms of our origins, our founder, Marta, she spent most of her professional career in California, out of Stanford University, where she led this biodesign program, which is focused on teaching medical and engineering backgrounds to essentially create digital health and health technology startups based on the design thinking approach. So they take design thinking, basically identifying a core need in the healthcare space, and developing a solution to address that need, as opposed to a technology push type process where you develop a technology and then you go and find the need. And so that whole biodesign thesis is core to how we look at companies. So we've flipped that on its head, and when we assess technologies and companies, we look at it from this need-driven perspective. So if they truly understand what this need is and they've developed a solution to address it, that's what we look for. So yes, that's essentially us. We're based in Barcelona, but we invest all over Europe. I would say about 60% of our focus is Europe, and then the rest mostly US, Canada, and we've made a couple of investments in Israel as well. So that's our geographic focus. We're not restricted in any sense. We try and bridge that gap. We have a deep understanding of the US healthcare ecosystem and the way the healthcare system there works, as well as the European side, even though there's no such thing as a European health system. Each country is extremely different, but from an umbrella perspective, they have the similar principles of mostly value-based care in Europe versus more of a fee-for-service type model in the US. And so we have networks in both, and we look to bridge that. So we help our companies both go to the US and come from the US and come to Europe. And that's also something we look at when we invest. We want to see companies that have that ambition to be global. It can be great companies that are focused on one country, but that's not quite a fit for us, essentially. And in terms of stage, we are early stage. So our sweet spot is the pre-seed and seed, where we typically come in as a first entry ticket of between €500,000 to €1 million. And as I mentioned before, we have a follow-on strategy where we reserve 60% of our fund for follow-on investments up to and including the Series A. So past the Series A, we do not invest. And we take a bit of a step back in terms of active support, because that's where the larger, deeper-pocketed VCs that are much smarter than us when it comes to growth come in and take more of an active role. So that's our remit, is to invest in and support these early stage founders get to a strong Series B position. But we will not invest further than that.
Okay, makes sense. You actually just kind of covered my next question. It was like, is Nina Capital a smart money for digital health startups? And I assume the answer is definitely yes.
Yes. So that's what we actually, if you look at our investment criteria when we go through the analysis process, one of the key questions we ask is Nina's value add. So we will not invest in companies where we don't see that we can add significant value to the company and to the founders and help them. It's part of our investment criteria. The whole team has this healthcare background. So we have, you already know about myself, our founder Marta, who I mentioned. She has a PhD in electrical engineering. She ran this biodesign program focused on healthcare startup creation. She's been the CEO of a medtech. She has also been a venture partner at a Silicon Valley VC, where she learned the ropes and everything to do with venture capital, focused on the healthcare space. So we all have deep healthcare experience in that sense. Our other partner, Mark, he, before joining Nina Capital, he founded his own company 20 years ago in the virtual care and telemedicine space. So he was one of the pioneers in telemedicine and virtual care. Grew that company to an international size. It's called Advanced Medical, and recently that got acquired by Teladoc. So Teladoc's actually, what is known today is made up of three companies, Teladoc, and then they made a few acquisitions. Advanced Medical was one of them, and that is now Teladoc International. So anything outside of the US, it's Mark's ex-company. So he exited that, joined Nina Capital originally as an investor, and then was interested in his next move, and so joined as a partner. And so he has that deep operational experience of a health technology company. And then the rest of the team all have experience, either they, technically in biotechnology, ex-founders of startups, ex-investors in the health tech space. So we all have that deep healthcare expertise, which we try and give support to all our companies and help them through the next stages. And it's not just us. So we have an extended network of both investment advisors and venture partners, we call them, but essentially they are experienced professionals in the health technology space. They're ex-founders. They've built and sold several companies. They're experienced investors, and we leverage them and their network and their expertise as well to provide support to our companies.
So how would that work? For example, I'm a startup founder who got some funding from Nina Capital, and I'm experiencing some issues, some problems, and I approach you or someone from your team, and you try to find someone in your network who can solve the problem, pretty much like that?
So if we'll have regular catch-ups with our startup companies, so we're quite aware of all of the problems and issues and things they need to be done.
I assume it's more often than once a quarter.
Yes, it can be once a quarter, it can be once every 2 weeks, once a month. It really varies depending on the stage of the company, what they're going through and everything. And then, based on that, we're like, okay, we for example, one of the European companies is really interested in understanding the value-based care market of the US. We know someone who's in our network, one of our venture partners, who has deep experience in selling into the value-based care proposition in the US. And so we'll introduce them, set up a call, and we'll discuss, talk about, what is needed, and give advice and support in that sense. That's one example, but you get the picture.
Right.
It really varies. It depends on the situation, but that's sort of how we try and do it. Just leverage our network.
So it sounds for lots of startup founders that are gonna watch this interview that Nina Capital is like a great VC for them in digital health. So how do they actually approach you and start the relationship going?
Sure. So actually a major source of our deal flow is our own outreach.
Really?
It comes from what we call the Nina platform, and that could be interns who are doing a deep research project on a particular need or market, and then find interesting companies out of that research. We reach out directly to them. It could be our venture partners and everything I described in terms of our network. They're deeply embedded in the ecosystem, and they see companies all the time. And so a lot of our deal flow is referrals from that, our extended network, who see these companies and are often advisors to many. And then our second one is inbounds. So on our website, we have a form that you can fill out and submit, and we aim to get back to you with an answer within 2 weeks, whether this is for us or not, and if we move forward with a first call. cold reach outs from LinkedIn, referrals from portfolio companies. So many, founders are very well networked, and so we get a lot of startups going through our current portfolio and asking for warm introductions through that. So there's a whole host of ways to do that. If you're part of an accelerator, we often try and have good relationships with several accelerators, and so we see connections through that.
That's really cool. Like I don't think I've heard a lot of cases when like the VC actually approached the startup from on that side.
Well, we were formed in 2019, so nobody knew us, and so we had to take this very proactive approach. And if you look at, I don't have a graph or anything to show you, but we do have that data, and the growth of inbounds, now that we have more visibility, is much higher. And so the percentage of our actual proactive outbound search is lower, but it's still the top one, and that's typically where the best deal flow comes from. It's because it's almost pre-qualified, and we know we're very interested in that space, for example.
Very interesting.
A few VCs do that as well.
All right. Due diligence process. What does it consist of at Nina?
Right. So when we think about the team, which is a very important part of our due diligence, it's not just the core team that we look at. They have to be very strong and complementary to each other. We also look at the extended team. Have they been able to attract very senior and expert level people to the startup, as core advisors? They've been there, they've done that. They can really support the core team in realizing their vision and helping the company grow. So that's also a very good sign for us when we look at companies. It's not only does it indicate that they're smart, they realize they don't know everything. They need these senior people with that expertise to help them. But it also is a good indication that they're onto something, because if they're able to convince these people who are very busy and probably have loads of offers to come join other startups, if they manage to bring them on board as advisors, that's a good indication that the company is doing something interesting, but also that the team are capable of selling their vision to actually convince them. So not only is the solution and their company interesting, the team is capable of conveying that, and it's a good indication that they'll be able to recruit key talent in the future as well as investors. So that's a very important aspect of our due diligence. But yeah, like I said, I've mentioned a fraction of what we do, but that's the key things we look at. It's the healthcare need, team, and the healthcare need in terms of value propositions, and then obviously the market size. And does the company have the potential to reach levels that make a financial return for us? So unfortunately, there's so many good companies out there that just don't make sense financially. VCs have an obligation to their own investors. So we promised a certain return level to them. And so for every company we invest in, we would like to see that if everything goes well, they develop this product and then they have this vision to go to expand into these different markets, build on the value proposition with additional products and offerings. If everything goes really well, we want to see that the upside potential for that company leads to a fund returner for us. That's what we talk about, fund returners. So if our investment can return, well, this fund, it's 42 million. So we look to see if everything goes really, really well. At the end, when there's an exit, we will get around 40 million out from that investment. That will happen, maybe two or three companies out of all of our portfolio. But we need to see that there is a chance for that happening. And then that the base case is a decent return, a 10x multiple on our investment over the course of our investment period, for example. So if all of that aligns, we'll invest. Plus several other things, which I don't want to go into too many details, but that's the basic thing.
Always wanted to know, do you still follow the startups? You were negotiating with them, thinking about investing in them, and at some point you said, okay, no, we're not going to do that. But do you still follow them afterwards to see if you made the proper decision not to invest them?
Absolutely. So we do have an anti-portfolio. Where there are some companies we've thought maybe we should have invested there, but we have a process and we stick to it and we don't look back. But we do always, like to tag ones that we really weren't sure about, and if they make it big in 10 years, happily include them in our anti-portfolio, and we'll write a blog post on the mistake we made and we missed that rocket ship. But we're going to miss things. There's no way we're going to get every single one, and that's okay. That's okay. We do the best that we can. Okay.
You've talked a little bit about the fund return to the investors of the VC. Is it necessarily only when the startup makes the exit, or a VC can potentially, sell the shares on the next round, for example? And do you do that?
Yeah. So typically, you'll have three sort of exit strategies. One is just the traditional M&A acquisition. The other is IPO. You had SPAC in there, but same principle, right? Just reversed. And then you have secondaries, which is what you mentioned, where another investor buys our equity stake. Mm-hmm. Typically, we always look for the first two, acquisition or IPO. That's how we want to exit. Mm-hmm. Secondaries become interesting once we near the end of our fund period. So we have a traditional fund period of 10 years. We look to exit everything within 10 years. With the addition of we can add 2 years past that. So it's a 10 plus 1 plus 1 type model. And if we're nearing, year 10, year 11, year 12, and we really need to exit, that's when you start looking at secondary exits, which is perfectly valid. Mm-hmm. You have many funds out there that are focused on secondary exits.
But I assume that you're a young VC.
Exactly.
So never happened.
For now, we don't need it, but it's definitely a viable route to exit a company, which we'll look at if and when the time comes.
How much does being at the right place at the right time play in the success of the startup nowadays?
I think whether it's a person or a startup, you need a little bit of luck. You can be very unlucky and just be in the wrong place, wrong time, but likewise, there is an element of luck in everything, I think. So maybe you started something, for example, that in the US there was no reimbursement code to actually enable providers to get paid and actually generate revenues from the solution. But you found this need from a patient's perspective 2 years before, right? And you're raising money, you're building something based on that, but there was nothing from a revenue perspective for providers. You're unfortunately in the wrong time, because the value proposition to the providers isn't there. If you're lucky or smart in that you really know this, but you start it, and that year a new reimbursement code gets released that enables physicians to get paid to use this solution. It's the same company, different time, because the market has changed. That's much more valuable. You find it much easier to gain traction, and you'll grow much faster. That's one example of things that, you may have to be a bit lucky. So 100% agree. There is some luck, but yeah.
Finally, at the very end, I ask my guests to give some kind of recommendations to startup founders in digital health, of course. And in your case, in terms of investment and raising funds, what would be your advice?
So this is advice that I give all our portfolio company CEOs as well. In that fundraising shouldn't be thought of as, okay, I'm going to go out for 3 months and do it. It's really a long-term process. Now, obviously, you don't want to be distracted and fundraising constantly. What you want to do is you focus on the business. But there are things you can do that will make fundraising much smoother and better. And the biggest thing there is nurturing relationships with VCs that could invest in you in the future. So one way to do that, and this is something we as a fund do as well to our own investors, have either a monthly or a quarterly, whatever cadence you feel is right for you, of an email with some key updates and key highlights on the progress that you have made in the last quarter or last month. And you send that out to, again, some pre-qualified investors. Some of the investors you think, okay, I really want them. They're good investors for my next round. You build that list and you keep them informed. And in this way, they will not only know you for longer, they will see what you're capable of. They'll see, okay, you said you're going to do this, you've achieved this. They see the progress you've made. And when it comes to time to actually go out and fundraise, they're already familiar with you. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't need to prove this progress. You've already done a big part of the work. And it'll make fundraising much easier. So keep these key investors updated. Nothing confidential, not a big update, a few bullet points, right? As an example, one of our portfolio companies, they were nurturing the relationship with an investor for 5 years before they actually invested. Obviously, this is a later stage investor, so they wouldn't have invested earlier, but they did do this. They started the relationship, they kept them up to date on their progress, and then 5 years later, they led the Series B of this company. Follow that same process, I would say, in a reasonable way. Don't lose focus on running the business, but don't neglect the fundraising aspect to the last minute. And in terms of timings, give yourself 6 months before you run out of cash to actually fundraise. In fact, in these conditions, 6 to 9. The other thing is, it is a numbers game. So you need to reach out to 100 plus VCs and investors to build the round that you're looking for. And that's not just reaching out to any investor. Do the work with pre-qualifying them. So really understand, okay, do I fit their thesis? Do I fit their stage? Do they even invest in seed where I invest? Do they invest in this particular health tech field? Have they invested in a direct competitor? So think carefully before reaching out to a VC that has invested in a competitor, but equally, they might not be a direct competitor. There could be synergies there. And so, do some due diligence and pre-qualify these investors to target the ones that will have the highest potential for success. Yes, and second of all, use warm introductions where you can. So once you've made this list, and you are actually keeping them up to date, the way to get in, find another founder, another portfolio company in their fund that you maybe have a relationship with. Ask them to introduce you. Founder referrals are extremely valued, highly valued by VCs, because it's almost pre-qualifying that this founder is good. They're good founder, and so we should take a look. Find other people who are connected and try and get as many warm introductions as possible. So if you do all of that, it should make the fundraising process a bit smoother. But it's not easy. If you look at us as a VC, I don't know how many investors we've reached out to, but it's well over 500, 600 in our database, and most of them say no. So what you go through, we also go through. It's worth understanding that as well.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's great, Sebastian. Thank you for this interview, and wish you best of luck and expand your portfolio in 2023 with some great digital health startups that potentially become unicorn someday.
Yeah, thank you, and it was fun being here. So thanks for inviting me to speak.
Thank you. Bye bye.